and welcome to this episode of For Your Consideration. My name is Guy, and today we are looking at madness. Madness, madness, madness. The madness of King George, the madness of King Lear, the madness of the Mad Harry Potter. The madness of the Mad Hatter, who's not Harry Potter, but maybe Harry Potter was mad too. Maybe I'm mad, maybe you're mad, who knows? We're talking madness. Now, madness pops up from time to time in various games, in various genres, especially if you're running things like Cthulhu. Madness is something that you're going to come across a lot. And so someone wrote in and said, please, can you talk about madness in games? It's an interesting conversation, it's an interesting topic, and one that has a certain amount of cultural sensitivity to it as well. Especially if we're talking about things like dementia, Alzheimer's, those that have got mental deficiencies or mental issues or mental challenges, however you want to put it. It can be something that we need to be very, very sensitive of, and something that you need to be aware that your players may have sitting around the table. You don't know necessarily their family backstory, so you've got to be careful when playing with madness. Now, madness, as far as I'm concerned, there are three areas that we need to look at. We need to look at the function that madness brings to your games, we need to look at how do you portray that, and then we need to look at the consequences. Now, this is both from madness afflicting your NPCs as well as madness affecting your players' characters. How do you handle it? How do you adjudicate for it? How do you GM this? How do you make it part of your world? So when we look at function, what is the function of madness? How do we bring it, and why do we bring it into our game? So it's usually a form of narrative. The Mad King is mad because we want him to make erratic decisions. We want him to be confused. We want him to cast out those that protect him and bring in those that are against him. We want to see that madness exhibited and to use it as a narrative device. That is certainly something that you can do, and you can definitely bring that in. We also can bring it in as a function of narrative in terms of your character has gone mad. So if you look at game systems like Cthulhu, where there is an actual sanity roll, it determines how far down the sanity scale you are, then you start to get phobias and you start to get madness kicking in. When you look at spells that induce madness, you've got to look at it. That's a narrative option for the player to now enact, but for you as a GM, it's a narrative option in terms of how are you going to use that? How are you going to drive that? How are you going to make the other characters react and respond to it? When we look at the madness of the emperors of Rome as they were destroying Rome, they did not listen to their advisors. They did not care. They were dangerously erratic. That madness was incredibly all-consuming. It really, really allowed them to murder people on a whim and not think anything of it. So that's a very strong narrative. We also need to think of the solution. What is the solution to this madness? So is there a solution? Now, unfortunately, here on planet Earth, we don't have solutions to a lot of different types of madness, and it is something that we are consumed with in terms of trying to overcome, and rightly so. It's a very, very, very horrid space to be in, to see a human who hasn't got control of their faculties. It's not comedic in the slightest in real life. In film and in narrative, it can become so. So in a world where you're running around with gods and magic, it can be solved. When you're in a starship, when you're in the future, it can be solved. There are neural realignments or brain synapse transference, mind melding, whatever you want to call it, there are solutions. In Cthulhu-style games, there's a function, there's a built-in function to go and sit with a psychologist and kind of shrink your head back down and get all those demons out, sometimes quite literally. So there are solutions. You need to know what the solutions are, and you need to see how they can be applied, because if the solutions are too easy, the Mad King suddenly gets cured. Why wouldn't his viziers slip him a little drink of, say, a couple... it's gone completely out of my head. Valiums, and suddenly the king calms down a little bit and he's okay. So the solutions need to be there, especially if it afflicts the character. So if the character starts to go mad, you need to make sure that there is a way that they can become unmad, they can become sane again. That's a very important journey that the characters, and more importantly, that the players need to know is available for them. If it isn't there, if there isn't this sense that I can overcome this, the player might just give up on that character. And if that's what you want, then that's fine. If that's a function, if that's nothing that you can do about it, if it's just how the rules work, that's okay. okay, but then you need to make sure that they are aware that they become mad and then take the character away from them very, very quickly. There's no point in making them have to play out that madness. Rather, you do it, because then you're in control of that situation and you've turned it into a narrative space. The character's now an NPC, and the other PCs have to now deal with this mad NPC. Don't let the player have to deal with that. They're not aware of where you're driving the story. And madness, as far as I'm concerned, should always be a story driver. If you go back to your Shakespeare and you go to King Lear, the madness of King Lear is what caused a lot of the conflict within that book, within that play, and that's what was the reason. Well, that was one of the reasons why he was mad, was because of the necessity for the story. So that's what you've got to make sure that you do. Now, when you portray it, generally it's acceptable to portray kings as mad. To portray old women as demented, evil old hags, as long as they themselves are seen as being somewhat evil. We don't think anything of portraying, say, Caligula or Nero as being these demented, almost comedic style, sadist, mindless people who've gone completely mad. On the other hand, when it starts to become player characters or people that are close, the NPCs that are close to the players, playing it in a comedic way seems very, very inappropriate to me. If you watch films that deal with madness, that deal with dementia, they are incredibly sad, incredibly moving types of films, types of books, types of experiences. And to make it comedic, I think, is something that just doesn't do it justice. If you look at short-term memory loss in the film Memento, I don't think anyone was laughing in that film. It's a fantastic film that deals with short-term memory loss, and it's so tragic the way that things play out because of it. So it's definitely not played as a comedic kind of space. And we have become more sensitive towards it as well. If you look at the original kind of films of the Three Stooges, that was madness personified, and people laughed at it at that stage. We don't really laugh at that anymore. If you do, that's absolutely fine. Just be aware that most people don't. So you can portray it comedically. I wouldn't advise it that way. I would rather have the deranged gnome who's scatterbrained rather than being mad, completely mad. Deadly, of course, is how we often portray these individuals. You look at the Joker from the Batman franchise. He's quite clearly mad, but he's also incredibly deadly. Most of Batman's enemies are crazy. They're mad. Specifically the Joker, of course. And they play that a lot, but it's often deadly. It's often chaotic as well. It's completely random. You're not sure what's going to happen. Your PCs should be on edge whenever they're dealing with this individual because they just don't know what's going to happen. Of course, it can be incredibly sad, incredibly poignant as well. Very, very depressing kind of portrayal if you want to go that route. And of course, there is as well paranoia. They can become exceptionally isolated, exceptionally paranoid, and that can also be very difficult for the PCs to deal with if the Mad King will only talk to the one PC and only if that PC stands in that corner. Again, that can come across as comedic. If you wanted to, that's okay. If you want it to be deadly, then if the PC stands somewhere else, or if the player seems to be taking it too casually and they say, well, my character walks up to the king, that king can turn around and say, I want his legs cut off so that he can never walk towards me again, and not relent because he's mad. That suddenly changes it into something that's very deadly, that's very chaotic. And that will keep the players definitely on their toes. So that's something that you need to bear in mind, is how are you going to play it out and what are the ramifications to your narrative, to your story, and to use it in different ways. I don't think that there is any one way that it should be done in. I think if you do play it as sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that, sometimes it's comedic, it will make it that much more powerful and resonate more with the players. So we're now talking consequences, of course. What are the consequences from a narrative perspective? What are the consequences for players? Can they be fixed? Can they be fixed? And if they can, how do they get fixed and how do they move forward? Is it a potion that they need to drink? Is it a psychologist they need to visit? Is it a curse that they need to have lifted from them? What is it that they need to do? Of course, if it's the king or if it's someone that they need to try and cure, what are the steps that you need to go through on that? And I would always advise, rather than saying, okay, well, you have to counsel the person. What counsel do you give them? Players are not psychologists, generally speaking, although I did play with a psychologist once. That was very interesting to see how they went about things. But generally speaking, players are not psychologists. They're not there for, let's do a couch session. We don't want to know what you say to the king to bring him down. Rather, let's go and get a potion. Let's go and get a magic item. Let's go and get an old soothsayer. Let's travel to the ends of the galaxy to find stardust, which will restore the memory of the Vulcan who can't remember. Or however you want to play it out for your genre. Make sure that the consequences, that the results of the madness is felt. Don't just say he's a mad king and then leave it at that. We need to explore it. You need to unpack it. You need to make it felt to the players so that they get the sense that the madness is very, very real. And if it's a affliction of the character, take control of that character away, because that's generally what madness is doing, is it's taking away the control of the individual, and it's just creating this chaotic world where the individual is no longer in control. So you as a GM should take it away from the player. I know that's what I do. It's very seldom that madness happens in my games. In Cthulhu, generally speaking, once madness is set in, there's very little that players are going to be doing anyway. So I usually take the character away and run it for myself whilst the madness lasts. And of course, make sure that the players are aware that there is a solution or that there isn't one and the character has been lost indefinitely. So madness is a very interesting space to play in. It's not something that I think is going to constantly come up in your games. It isn't something that is necessarily going to enhance your games too much. It is a vehicle in which you can explore some very interesting ideas. You can create some very interesting villains, of course. As I said, Batman, I don't think any of his villains are not insane. Actually, if you look at most of the Marvel universe, their villains are almost always insane. They're not cold and calculating. You wouldn't say that Darth Vader was insane, necessarily speaking. You wouldn't sort of look around and go, oh, well, clearly Voldemort was insane. Maybe he was, but he wasn't mad. It wasn't kooky dementia or this bizarre sense of living in a different world, such as you get with, say, the Joker, or the Riddler or Iceman and that kind of thing. So it's something that you can look at, something that you can explore, but do so with caution. Of course, you don't know what your other players or what your players have in their backgrounds, but also use it for a narrative reason and make sure that there is a solution, that there isn't one, and that the players know that going into it. And I say that because if the players think that there's a solution and they search for 3 sessions and they don't find it, they're going to feel very, very, very disenfranchised, very disengaged from the game. If they go in going, there is no solution for madness, so once you're mad, I take over your character, then they know it's a real threat, it's a real risk that they run, and once they get to that point, they are no longer in control. It really will make them have a much better experience. They'll actually perhaps look forward to getting mad, to seeing who got mad first, as you like, sort of a badge of honor. So madness, it's an interesting idea. Let me know your thoughts. Have you ever had a character go mad? Have you ever had parties go mad? How do you deal with madness? What do you think in terms of how we need to play this in our hobbies to express it to the maximum effect and most advantageous adventure generating and story generating way that we possibly can? Until next time, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more of these, and I have to say, I just want to wish you the happiest of weekends.